Hello and welcome to Wake Up.
It's time to wake up, the Sonia Poulton.
Good morning. How are you all? I hope you're well. I'm still fiddling around with my stuff here. Oh, there you go. How are you people? There we go. Right. Sorry about that. It's Monday the 2nd of March. It's 9:01. It's one of those days, plainly. We've entered March season. Good morning to you all. Hello, Drumstick and Merv and Kira and Randy and Ghetto Gothic and Colin and Catherine Hutton and Jacqueline and you name it. It's the full crew in the house, people. Boaty McBoatface. How are you? Thank you very much. Very much. Thank you. And lovely to see you all. Hello, crew in the house. I hope everybody is absolutely sparkling well. It's beautifully spring-like out in my garden. I don't know what it's like in your garden or in your park or wherever you are, but I hope it is as beautiful as it is here. Welcome to the show that knows a show of might is very seldom a show of right. So pick wisely. On today's show, we will be joined by journalist and geopolitical analyst Warren Thornton. He'll be giving us the lowdown on Iran and his geopolitical roundup. Plus, we will be talking to politician Ben HABIB from Vallance, UK. He'll be taking your questions live, which I think is incredibly brave, frankly. Also news, Hong Kong spy case, inquest update for Donohoe, the assisted dying bill in the UK, information on ex-cop Maggie Oliver and the High Court. Plus, I'll be looking at Operation Ore. Are you familiar with it? Why did it destroy so many lives? And your shout, we'll be looking at tax for car camping and why is the NHS ignoring my sick son? And at the end of the show, we'll be looking at structure. It's not boring at all, people. It's a lifesaver. Yes, I used to be of the mind that talking about structure or anything like that was just like so boring. And I've learned so much in recent years about kind of like the importance of structure. How are you? Good morning, Philip. Good morning, Gary. Good morning, Shin. And good morning, Nathan. Hello. Thank you for being here. And happy St. David's Day to people from yesterday, if you are Welsh. And I'm my mum is of Irish Welsh descent. And well, that makes me as well. So coming up this week, in fact, today, the trial for two men accused of spying for the Hong Kong intelligence service in the UK is scheduled to begin today, 2nd of March, 2026, at the Central Criminal Court, also known as the Old Bailey in London. The defendants are Chung Bi-yun. He's an office manager at the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in London and a retired Hong Kong police officer. And his co-defendant is Chi Lung Wai, a UK border force officer and volunteer officer for the City of London Police. Both men are charged under the National Security Act 2023 for assisting a foreign intelligence service and foreign interference. Wei faces an additional charge of misconduct in public office for allegedly conducting unauthorized searches of Home Office databases. The prosecution claims the pair engaged in information gathering, surveillance, and acts of deception targeting Hong Kong pro-democracy activists living in the UK. They are also accused of a forced entry into a UK residential address on the 1st of May 2024. A third man was originally charged, former Royal Marine Matthew Trickett, but he was found dead in a park in Maidenhead in May 2024, and proceedings against him obviously were subsequently discontinued. Both defendants have pleaded not guilty to all charges. The trial was originally set for early 2025, but was postponed to today to allow legal teams more time to review evidence. And it's expected to last approximately 4 to 6 weeks. And it will be before Justice Bobby Chima Grubb. It's not to be confused with the China spy case, which is a separate case altogether involving Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry. It collapsed in late 2025 after prosecutors determined they could not meet the required evidential threshold. And this Thursday, grooming gang whistleblower Maggie Oliver, she's going to be in the High Court. More power to her elbow. Maggie, of course, is a former detective, and she has said child sexual abuse survivors should not be asked to relive their most traumatic experiences only to see no meaningful action taken. So what she's referring to is the conclusions of the 2022 Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, also known as ICSA. It recommended 20 major reforms to protect children in England and Wales. These included collecting data relating to the ethnicity and religious background of perpetrators of horrific crimes. And a recent report by Baroness Louise Casey found a significant overrepresentation of Asian men who are suspects in grooming gangs. It added that while authorities are in denial, more needs to be done to understand why this is the case. The 2022 report took 7 years and cost the British taxpayers £200 million. It was chaired by Alexis Jay. The inquiry was launched to examine how public and private institutions failed to protect children from child abuse, and that all occurred after the revelations of Jimmy Savile. And Maggie Oliver worked for Greater Manchester Police. She said that there was a huge amount of kind of cultural sensitivity around this issue, and it let down survivors. And she said the government has promised another national inquiry, this time focused on so-called grooming gangs. Survivors have every right to be heard, but why launch another inquiry when the recommendations of the last one remain unimplemented? And she's absolutely right. And this, of course, has happened on the watch of both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, which is why I get so ticked off when these people try and make political gain on the backs of survivors of child abuse and survivors of grooming gangs. So Maggie and her foundation, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, will now be heading to the High Court on Thursday to they're hoping to proceed to a full judicial review hearing. And if permission is granted, the charity said the government will be required to explain its failure to implement the measures recommended by the child abuse inquiry. So more power to your elbow, Maggie. She never gives up, and I fully support that. How are you all? Good morning. Good morning, Summer Breeze. Good morning. And well done, you all. We had on last week Catherine O'Sullivan with Oliver Lawrence. They were talking about missing Jack O'Sullivan. And I believe it was the 2nd of March when Jack went missing. So that's 2 years ago today. They launched a GoFundMe on Wake Up. When I checked last night, they had over half of their target. I am absolutely thrilled. Well done, you brilliant people out there. We will certainly have contributed to that, because when I checked in a day later after they'd been on Wake Up, they already had close to £6,000. So more power to your elbow, people. More power to your elbow. And just before I bring in our first guest, I want to just briefly refer to the ongoing inquest into the death of Noah Donohoe. This is Noah with his mum, Fiona. Fiona, of course, has conducted an extensive campaign. Noah was a 14-year-old schoolboy from Belfast whose disappearance on the 21st of June 2020 and subsequent death triggered a major search operation and a high-profile campaign for justice by his mother, Fiona. His body was discovered 6 days later in a storm drain in North Belfast. A post-mortem examination concluded the cause of death was drowning. The ongoing inquest has heard that the storm drain where Noah was found was unlocked and easily accessible. His body was located over 500 meters downstream from the inlet. Some reports say 625. I heard a report which said that generally they stopped searching at about 250 meters, but they went further and past the 500 meter point, and that was where they found Noah. Evidence has been presented regarding delays in sharing critical information. For example, a ping from Noah's phone was known to police 7 hours before being shared with search teams. There's clearly a problem with the investigation from the get-go. Then there was the massive coincidence. A man named Darryl Paul, who was jailed for stealing Noah's rucksack and attempting to pawn his laptop, was seen on CCTV standing near Noah's home as the boy began his journey, because he left his home and was cycling. However, the court was told there was no physical interaction between them. A massive coincidence indeed, and lots of unusual circumstances. Witnesses and CCTV footage showed Noah cycling unclothed shortly before he disappeared. His clothing and bicycle were later found abandoned. Hundreds of volunteers joined emergency services in an extensive search that lasted nearly a week. And last week, jurors really struggled because they watched a documentary featuring Fiona and her sister, and it was captured while they were still looking for Noah. And they also captured the moment that Noah's body was discovered during the making of the program. It was devastating, absolutely devastating. And police had heard that Noah had been behaving strangely before he left home for the final time, but there was a problem with the CCTV. Detective Sergeant Gardner was being questioned at the inquest about CCTV footage collected from the area where Noah lived. Mr. Gardner said, in terms of CCTV, no, the priorities were elsewhere. And this was the information we had was that he was behaving strangely in the house. And yes, their priorities were elsewhere, no doubt about it, which is why Fiona has been forced to campaign so extensively herself. Since always problems with the CCTV, says Shug. Indeed, it's a horrid story, Shin. Absolutely horrid. Let's bring in our first guest. I believe he's here. And frankly, I want to find out what is going on, because the world seems to be going to hell in a handcart, I think the expression is. Let me just bring him in. Here he is. Warren Thornton, everybody. Good morning, Warren. How are you?
Hello, Sonia. How are you? I'm very well. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm so glad you're here with us, because I actually can't make any sense about what's happening. Obviously, there's been this extensive bombing that has taken place in Iran, and I can't tell whether Iranians are happy or not, because there's so much mixed footage. There's so much misinformation online. You cannot trust what is being said on X. It's absolutely captured. Warren, talk to us. Tell us what is going on.
Yeah, no problem at all. So probably the stupidest thing they could have done was kill the Ayatollah, because he was the only man who had literally put out 2 religious fatwas about basically getting a nuclear weapon. So that tells you everything you need to know, the fact that this was never over the idea of getting a nuclear weapon. And in fact, the gentleman in temporary charge, Farsi, literally they've got to have a 12th, which is part of their faith. They've got to have a caliphate, which is an assembly, then 3 people on a committee. And of course, they will then nominate the new Ayatollah. But the gentleman who's in charge at the moment is very, very pro having a nuclear weapon. So the nonsense that Iran are developing a nuclear weapon, they killed the very man who turned around and said it is punishable by death to have a nuclear weapon, and they killed him.
I've deliberately brought up this very provocative headline. It's from the New York Post, a very captured institution. Death to the devil. Yeah, I'm seeing people weeping and wailing about his death. I can't make sense of it, Warren. Was he a devil?
No, absolutely not. I mean, he was a person of his people, and this is the trouble in the West. We don't understand these people, how they work and how they act, and what their, shall we say, their core systems are. Now, the problem that we have here, of course, is the Israelis managed to break into Iranian TV, and Benjamin Netanyahu broadcast a rise up everybody and take over your country. Well, it went totally the other way. There were actually people on the streets last night while the missiles were flying in the air, praising the Ayatollah, and it has gone completely the other way. Everybody inside of Iran is absolutely out on the streets in praise of the government. And of course, it's only getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, it's so bad that Donald Trump tried to do a back channel through Italy to have a talk with Iran. Now, he has put out that, of course, Iran want to talk to him. Iran have categorically, we have a person who's very close to the government there. He was very busy yesterday, so we had to find time to talk to him. But the government have categorically turned around and said they've had no contact with America and do not want any.
I think what's interesting for many people is they did the whole big board of peace, didn't they? Which was about, obviously, peace in the Middle East. And then suddenly this takes place. What is this man's role in this all?
Well, this wasn't a board of peace, Sonia. Everybody got it wrong. What he actually meant was we're bored of peace. And that's the problem that they have here. Of course, he is surrounded by Israeli donors. He's been getting really, really bad information. And of course, he has gone ahead and gone with the strikes. Now, very simply, let me give you a scenario here. They are actually taking Patriot missile rockets from Ukraine to transfer over because, of course, the Iranians have launched over 2,000 strikes, so have the Americans. But the Americans at that rate will be out of weapons to fire in about 3 weeks. Now, the problem that they have as well with the Patriot missile defense systems, they've got to fire about 4 of these rockets every single time to try and bring down what they're using, which is basically old ballistic missiles and Shahed drones. And every time they use a hypersonic, of course, the target that they're going for, they actually hit. So Iran have got enough weapons to keep this going for a long, long time. America have 3 weeks to get this done. Otherwise, they'll start running out of weapons very, very quickly.
Of course, the thing that's upset so many people, even if people are neutral, is the bombing of the school. Let's have a little brief look at the video. Absolutely horrendous. Now, you sent that to me when it was all just kicking off, and obviously the death toll is much higher now than it was listed on that video. What can you tell us about that, and what was their justification?
Well, the justification was that Israel actually targeted it. We actually spoke to somebody in British intelligence who works for MI6, and the targeting was done from Akrotiri Air Base by Great Britain. The missile was fired by America, but the source, the GPS location, was given to them by Israel, who said there was a weapons cache at that school, and what there was it was an elementary school. And they hit the school and they killed so far the death toll. They're still pulling bodies out, but the latest death toll we have is 118 children were killed in that airstrike. But nobody thought to check that the Israelis, they said there was a weapons cache there. There was no weapons at all.
What is our role in all of this? You've said that this, I think you said to me in no uncertain terms that this scumbag has helped. What's going on?
So what we've been doing from Akrotiri Air Base is we've been doing flights over the top and helping helping Israel and the US to be able to target the people that they want to hit. So it's basically been one of those roles. Now, the nonsense that came out was that we were using Diego. We wouldn't let them use Diego Garcia. Well, Diego Garcia was never an option because it's 3 times the distance to Iran that Akrotiri is. So they wanted to keep sort of Britain out of it. And of course, now they found a reason to do it by saying, first of all, that there was a missile. Once that was disproved, that the missile was aimed at Akrotiri Air Base, then, of course, they said that a drone had literally been flown there. There's no evidence of this whatsoever from all the radar stations. And of course, we keep a good track on everything like this and the radar stations and everything else. So it is complete nonsense, and it's just a reason for the UK to publicly declare what they've been privately doing, which is taking part in this war all along. If you've got any chance, go and have a look at the Cyprus Mail. We've been doing flights from Akrotiri Airport, which is obviously a British enclave in Cyprus, for ever since 2023, targeting Yemenis and targeting many people for the Israelis and the Americans to strike.
This feels like war. Are we in war here?
We are in a war. We are in a war, and many people will turn around and go, and there is a false flag here because they've said that a drone has struck Akrotiri Air Base. Well, there's no drones been set off, and of course, the missile that they said, a casing from a missile, had landed in Cyprus, and of course, this was proof that a missile had been shot at Cyprus. But this was a false flag because it turned out to be the video turned out to be in North Africa, and it was an irrigation pipe that was laying on the floor, not a missile case.
I think Marco Rubio is due to meet Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But Marco Rubio is 100% sold down the line. If this guy ever becomes president of America, do watch out. He'll be far worse than Donald Trump. You have to remember that there's only 4 active senators and 4 active people in the Congress that don't take money from AIPAC, which is the Israel lobby.
It's sort of insane, isn't it, really? I think people really struggle to understand it because we're seeing so much dis and misinformation online, including AI-generated videos. It is quite clear that social media is really a problem here. So how can we find our way through this? Because, I mean, people could even say that you're biased, Warren, right? And it's interesting because I've got he's actually Benjamin, but Ben HABIB on later, and he's on completely the opposite side of the table to you. So can you see why people get very confused about it? But it seems to me that Iranians are happy according to some social media and devastated according to other. And I know I'm kind of laboring this because I think it's so difficult for people to really truly understand what is taking place. What good, you just mentioned one, but what other good, reliable sources would you recommend?
I think the Duran is a very good source, but also, I mean, obviously we have military sources because of our background, and we have people that come, shall we say, from aid agencies, and we also know people in embassies. So we're able to get an accurate picture of what is really going on. And the trouble is, I mean, Ben HABIB, for instance, will be on as your guest, but it would be interesting to ask him, does he receive any money from Israel lobbies whatsoever? I mean, he was at the Tommy Robinson rally. And of course, they're there with 2C TV. They're also there with Rebel News TV. All of these people receive money from this. It is a thing of follow the money, who sponsors them, and look at the timing. When the timing of these events and following the money is a crucial key to understanding what's truly going on.
I think it's really interesting, actually, the British reaction that you're talking about there, because Tommy Robinson issued a really inflammatory tweet. Bomb them, lads, he said. So he's captured, isn't he, old Tommy?
Yeah, absolutely. And he's actually come out and said that he's a committed Zionist. Now, while one praises him for his work in exposing the grooming gangs in the early days, it was very, very simple. Then when he went to jail, the various Israeli interests started paying his legal fees, and he was captured from then on. This isn't about what we're screaming out for in the country. I think is somebody who's not pro-Israel, who's not pro-Muslim, but is actually pro-Britain. That would be really nice.
I thought it was quite interesting that Rupert Lowe made that comment, and I'm having to paraphrase him, but essentially he doesn't support it, and we should be focusing more on England and the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these wars, forever wars, as they call them, are quite crazy. And we said back in September, we said straight after Christmas, they'll be going back and having a go. We even predicted the exact date, which was February the 28th, because from our source in the Pentagon, we knew that they were going to strike on the 28th when the Gerald R. Ford got there, after trying to sort out some of its toiletry problems, shall we say, that it had. And of course, this is the whole idea of this. Lots of people don't really get this. They're breaking up Iran is essential to stop what is called the Golden Corridor, because the whole of the, shall we say, the Arab sides, all up the side of the Strait of Hormuz, are pretty much in America's hands. As you can see from that, you can see Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, and now Syria has pretty much fallen. So there is no transit corridor there. But the transit corridor they want to take is where you see that little piece of land with Dubai there, just opposite across the water, the Straits of Hormuz, is a place called Bandar Abbas. Now, just down the road from there, where they're doing the rail link to cross Iran and into Russia and into China, into India, of course, is a place called Chabar. And they've hit that twice for absolutely no reason. There's nothing there but ports and a railway office.
Let me read you some of these comments. M says they want the uranium from Iran for the nuclear power. Data can't manage with oil power. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the enriched uranium, when they turn around and say they actually offered to give it to China or a third party rather than the US, and they didn't like that very much at all. And he's absolutely right. This enriched uranium is to 60%. Now, you can go and look it up for yourself. You only need 20% if you want to make a nuclear bomb. So it is about breaking up Iran, breaking up the chance of what is trillions and trillions of dollars worth of passageways and of course, the route to the east, and of course, taking the resources, which includes uranium.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, but obviously the murder of the Ayatollah, surely that has to be considered as a war crime, because what a precedent that you can just rampage into other people's countries and take out their leaders. Quite shocking stuff, really.
Yeah. Well, also they waited until the Sunday because they knew that his daughter and his son-in-law, and of course the granddaughter was there. She was only 14 months old. She was killed as well. They could have taken him out at any time. He was a very old man. He was actually quite ill and in quite a lot of pain. And he just turned around and said, "I'm not going to hide in a bunker if they're going to get me. I'm going to go out standing on my own 2 feet." And that is exactly what happened. But what they've done is they've actually martyred him. And this is what people don't realise. And there'll be many, many people who turn around and go, "Oh, nonsense! You don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're full of it and everything else." These people do not understand how the Iranian people work, and they haven't got the first clue because they talk from a position of ignorance. Martyring this guy was the worst thing they could possibly have done, and they've gone and done it. And now, of course, the whole of Iran is there is literally a jihad now. So that means that everybody who ever goes on holiday or anything else is now a target, and that has been done by politicians, bankers, and arms dealers who never pay the price. It's the likes of me and you and the general public out there who do.
Let me read you some of these comments. We have a lot coming in. Computer Man says, "Why sympathy for people that want to kill our way of life?" How do you respond to that?
Well, it's very, very simple. Why do you want to kill their way of life? Who have Iran invaded or attacked over the last 20 years? And who have the USA invaded, attacked, or overthrown in the last 20 years? So why not leave them to get on with their lives like we do with the North Koreans who don't bother anybody? Why not let Iran get on with their life? And while we're talking about terrorists, 80% of the world's terrorists are actually Sunnis, which are backed by either Saudi Arabia, Israel, or the USA.
You may have answered this already. Owley says, "How does the portal play into the US's interests?"
Very, very simply, once we look at the US interests of everything that's out there, of course, it is always about. There's a wonderful, wonderful line by Cliff Robertson in a film called 3 Days of the Condor, when it turns around and says, "What happens when your homes run out of heating? They won't want to know how we do it. They'll just want it to get it for us, or get it for them." So very, very simply, it is all about it's about busting up bricks. It's about making sure you have control of all the world's resources and having control over the areas that you do not have.
London Lady said that's what they want, control of the shipping oil. But surely they want so much more than just that.
Yes, they do. But of course, the Straits of Hormuz, Iran have effectively closed that down now. Maersk and many other shipping countries, shipping magnates have said don't use the Straits of Hormuz. So, of course, that will then mean you've got to transport the oil the other way. So that pushes the prices up. And then, of course, that then passes on to you because that comes in at the petrol pump. Then, of course, it costs more for petrol to deliver goods to your shop. So prices go up as well. If it goes up about over $90 a barrel, then we've got a problem.
Chow Chow says this is all a distraction. Do you feel it's a distraction from something more pertinent?
Well, it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? Because it seems that when something like the Epstein files is going on, and let's face it, there is much to see here. And Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, they probably belong in jail because there have been obfuscations. There's been a litany of stupidity and everything else. And Howard Lutnick has been shown quite clearly to have been a good pal of Epstein's. And he is part of the American government. How has he not resigned? And why has Pam Bondi protected him?
Interesting. And also, you talk about forever wars because the aim is obviously just to keep a continuous war going. And Em is saying in the comments, it'll be Turkey next. Do you think there's some truth in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Greater Israel Project that is out there takes various parts of about 5-6 different countries. Turkey, anything that is a threat as far as Israel are concerned, and as far as Israel are concerned, or the Zionists, I wouldn't say this about Jewish people. Orthodox Jewish people are lovely, but the Zionists that are in control of the agenda here just want complete control of the Middle East. It's as simple as that.
Gina says something that I think is absolutely worth raising up because this is what we're hearing a lot on social media. Gina says, "I was under the impression some of the Iranians wanted life to be like it was before, when the women were more free and could wear what they wanted and were valued more." How do you respond to that?
Well, if you actually go to Iran, and I've been a couple of times, the women are allowed to either wear, they can either have a covering or they can not have a covering. If you go to any of the markets or anything else, the women are a lot freer. That's just a Western trope that we have. The women are a lot freer. The Ayatollah was actually quite relaxed about that. We don't know what we'll get with the new one, but of course it's part of their faith. The women are not walking 5 yards behind the men, and they're not completely covered up like what most people would call a letterbox. They are. Some of them wear head coverings because of their faith. Some don't. You can see that quite clearly if ever you go to Iran. It's very much a cafe evening society, and many people do not cover their hair at all.
So many questions for you this morning. You can see it's taken such a toll on people because regardless of whether you have any interest in it or not, we get an absolute bombardment of information, obviously, and some of it's so incredibly emotive. Drumstick wants to know, what do you think of the regime's handling of demonstrators?
The demonstrations that were actually taking part in Iran, and I'd always say the government rather than the regime, because that's the sort of wording they'd like you to use to make you think they're bad people. You always say regime. So the government organisations, they basically got stuck in and got rid of the protesters. Now you have to remember that very simply, the people that started the protests were killing non-protesters. 67 of them in their own homes. There's only 3,117 people killed, not 30,000. And of course, all the Starlink terminals that we use to foment all this tyranny and everything else came from America. And in fact, a couple of Dutch diplomats were caught smuggling Starlink terminals into Iran. Now, when Russia cut off the Starlink terminals, all of a sudden, all these protests stopped and they started arresting these people. And of course, this was all planned, kill a few protesters, blame it on the government. And then, of course, the government and the arms were smuggled through somewhere called the Zangezur corridor, which is that little corridor between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the top of Iran.
Am I looking at the right thing here?
You've got India there. No, that's the wrong one. That's all right. So basically, if you've got a map of Iran, there we go. So Iran there with that map you just had up. So at the very top, if you go above Baghdad and you go to the top of Iran there, there's a Zangezur corridor. Now that's in between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That is run by BP Oil and has over 3,000 American mercenaries actually there. And that's where the arms were smuggled through to terrorist groups like MEK and Al-Jaish that were left over. And many of these weapons were left behind in Afghanistan and were smuggled through Pakistan.
They say there's always a tweet, don't they? And with Donald J. Trump, there's always many tweets. And there's many tweets that he has previously written going back to like 2013, where he talks about, I'll give you an example. Remember that I predicted a long time ago that President Obama will attack Iran because of his inability to negotiate properly, not skilled. And I want to add to that Summer Breeze in the comments seems to feel that there is some relation with the Epstein stuff. Summer Breeze says Trump has been targeted about being dodgy Epstein stuff, so suddenly there is a war kicking off. Now that's not the first person I've heard say that. Do you think there's anything to that at all?
Well, there's certainly questions to answer on behalf of Melania Trump, because the simple fact is she was good friends with Ghislaine Maxwell before she even met Trump, and the emails from the Epstein file showed quite clearly that there was a good close relationship there. They met up and everything else, and you have to wonder if that was sort of like a honeypot. Somebody coming to the end of their time as a model. I mean, she was certainly not in the, shall we say, the first flush of youth when she met Donald Trump. And then, of course, one of those, here's a meal ticket, a billionaire. And it's not the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. But there's certainly questions to be answered in that direction. And if Trump were to just come out, Melania Trump were to come out and answer all those questions, instead they tried to cover it up. They've released the names of the victims and hid the names of the perpetrators. When you're doing that, Sonia, everybody then thinks there's something to see here. And there quite clearly is. We just don't know the full extent of what.
Jan says, so where were you allowed to go in Iran, Warren? Just tourist places?
No, I was allowed to go wherever I wanted. I didn't have any. I've actually visited Iran and North Korea. It was quite funny when I went to both places, because I sat next to a BBC reporter when I went to North Korea. and he was followed all the way because they knew exactly what he was up to, and I was allowed the freedom to wander around where I wanted. When I went to Iran, I've been to Tabriz. Actually gone along the Golden Corridor so that I knew what I was talking about, to see where the building of the railway was. And it is very, very strange, Sonia, that 28 Chinese engineers have been killed by terrorist groups that are sponsored by US and Israel in the last 7 years, trying to build that railway through Iran. So I've traveled extensively in Iran. I never had any problems at all.
I try and give as many different viewpoints as possible here, Warren. Sean says, Is Israel want the surrounding states to stop attacking them? Very simple. Is it that simple?
Well, can you last tell me when Iran actually launched first against Israel? Israel always declare, you have to remember that over the last year, Israel have attacked 6 states that haven't attacked them. There may be 1 or 2 that you could turn around and say, but you can't disguise the butchery that's gone on in Gaza. If you think October the 7th, that this is a response or a reprisal for October the 7th, I don't care who you are. If you're killing children, and if they did kill children, as they say, on October the 7th, then you killing children makes you as bad as them.
Where I am says, look at how arrogant they are, bombing children and saying they are spreading peace. Well, quite, absolutely.
Yeah.
And somebody makes kind of half a comment here without actually being a question, saying, will he talk about the City of London? What does
Yes,
that...
not a problem at all. Yeah, I know exactly what they're talking about there. What they're talking about is the banks, and the Iranians have actually said something about this. And there is if you like, a banking cabal. It's also known as the Khazarian Mafia, which is very much an Israeli banking system, but which includes all the Rothschilds and everything else, including Jacob Rothschild. And the Iranians have actually turned around and said that Nathaniel Rothschild is on their list as one of the people and one of the banks that is doing this. So the City of London banks that they're talking about, very much they have a very strong control of that. In fact, over half the CEOs of the banks in London are literally have worked for the Rothschilds at one time or another.
So what do you think is going to happen this week? There's obviously retaliation quite naturally. I mean, that's already happening. But what do you think? And I also noted, by the way, I don't know if you saw this, that Melania Trump is actually chairing a UN Security Council meeting on education, technology, peace and security. Why is she doing that?
Well, she's doing that because it's been lined up by Donald Trump. Let's face it, the UN building is in New York. It's jobs for the boys. Why have we got Witkoff and, of course, Jared Kushner? Why have we got them going and negotiating and deciding whether or not we're going to bomb Iran? Trump actually turned around and said the final decision will rest with 2 real estate developers.
And somebody said that they appreciate you answering all these questions. I do too, as well, because lots of people have so many questions about what's going on. And I tend to agree with Jan that the kind of level of information coming at us is almost deliberate. I don't know if Jan said this, but kind of paraphrasing, is almost deliberately designed for us just to have emotional reactions, but not necessarily factual ones. So you are obviously covering this. Will you be covering this again this evening on your show?
Yes, we will be covering it because, of course, as you were saying, it is based to try and drive your emotions. And, of course, many people will turn around and disagree with what I'm saying. But I would just turn around and go and look at the facts. Go and look at the amount of devastation that has been caused around the world with literally getting rid of people that they don't want or that don't get on with the USA. Russia and China would be next. There's no question about that. And we'll be talking about that tonight at 6 p.m. as well.
And Andrew, I have to refer to what Andrew's saying, and that is that this is a country that kills people for being gay. And there are some people in the comments saying, I can't believe that we're defending them and what's going on. But I do wonder how much of the truth we are actually told. Yeah,
I mean, it is one of those things that it is illegal to be gay out there, and that's absolutely fine. And that's your viewpoint. That's the way they live. The same in North Korea, but North Korea don't go around killing other people in other countries for their beliefs. We do.
Got you. And right, Reba says thank you, Warren. Danielle says thank you, Warren. We have got quite a lot of, I would say, pro-Zionists in the comments today, more than usual, which is really interesting.
That's fine.
Yeah, what is truth? Somebody said exactly. Yet we get put into prison for saying women are women, says Mrs. Staffy. I mean, that's the other interesting thing. Before you go, Warren, and I do think it's worth just kind of looking at this again. And that is, don't you think to a degree we are all so overly engaged in everybody else's business rather than our own? I mean, we've got Maggie Oliver, who's going into the High Court this week because recommendations from the child abuse inquiry, not one of them was put into effect. So there appears to be a failure. Do you feel that we are almost constantly encouraged on social media and mainstream media to look elsewhere rather than here?
Yeah, absolutely that. I mean, we need to take care of our own business before we start taking care of anybody else's. And in the UK, which I'm not, I'm sorry to say, I'm in the Philippines at the moment covering for what's going to happen between China and the USA and their proxies, which will be Japan and the Philippines. But in the UK, there are many, many problems that need solving. There's mass immigration. People don't want to see that. But nobody's listening to the people, Sonia. There's not one person out of the 650 MPs that are in Parliament that are worth a light. You never trust a politician because they lie to you for a living. When was the last time, Sonia, a politician came and knocked on your door and instead of turning around and saying, if I'm elected, I'll do this, when did he knock on your door and said, what would you like me to do for you as I'm representing you?
Got you. Absolutely. Warren, thank you so much for joining us this morning and staying on for an extended time because, as you can see, so many questions. And I really do appreciate you being prepared to answer them as transparently as you have.
I'll even answer the Zionists. No problem at all.
Thank you. Wonderful. Take good care of yourself. Lovely to have you with us. Warren Thornton, everybody. And I will put in the description a link to his show so you can go watch it. It's fabulous. Take good care of yourself. Lovely to have you with us. God bless you too, sweetheart. Absolutely. And there you go. And there's so people in the comments, they like to try and provoke me. You can't, right? Because it's just ridiculous. When I see things like, Sonia won't touch Muslim with 100 foot, don't be silly. You make yourself look silly because you make yourself look ignorant. I'll touch anything if I have to, right? So don't be silly, right? Hugs Warren, says Skelevade. They're fighting in the comments. Centertil says, Mossad bots, Sonia. Yeah, but at least they're here, right? Let's bring them here, right? Let's bring them here because it all helps the algorithm, obviously. Touche. Yes, absolutely. Touche. Right. I want to talk about something completely different before I bring in our next guest. Many thanks, Warren, says Vanessa. I want to talk about assisted dying. It's been very emotive. The assisted dying bill has been attempted to go through Parliament over the last year. There have been issues with it. We've had people like Esther Ranson, former broadcaster, I suppose she could still be called a broadcaster, who has apparently been dying over the last 2 years, and she's pushed for it. And the reality is that Esther Ranson is obviously in a position where if she wanted to, she could absolutely afford to go off to Dignitas in Switzerland. And lots of people are very, very concerned about the assisted dying bill. But now it appears that it's facing almost certain collapse. And I did say this about a month ago. And one of the reasons is because it's likely to fail due to lack of time, because there's only a certain period of time in which you can attempt to put through these bills, and they have until May, and there's still far too much outstanding for them to go through. And the team behind the bill said that they are now really expecting the legislation in its current form to fail. There are 6 remaining sitting days left before May when the King's speech happens, and the government is not repeating what it did in December by giving more time. Esther Ranson is furious. She said this is absolute blatant sabotage. This is a handful of peers putting down 1,200 amendments, not to scrutinise the bill, which is their job, but to block it. A few peers, for their own reasons, have decided they're going to stop this going through Parliament, and the only way to stop them would be to invoke the Parliament Act, which has happened before, or get rid of the House of Lords. They're clearly not fit for purpose. Esther Ranson is so desperate for this to become law that she's finding herself in a position where she's turning against the very establishment that made her in the first place. She paid tribute to Sir Keir Starmer, who favours assisted dying coming into law. She said that he's done everything he promised her before the election. Question: what is a politician doing, promising a celebrity that they are going to change the law in such a radical way? Well, he did. He promised her that, and he's done everything that he can. And the process, frankly, has been really torturous. I mean, there's been thousands of amendments. And part of the problem is that I think we simply don't trust the people whose hands this is in. And these are largely the same people who were part of the C-19 hoax. And now they want us to believe that our lives are literally safe in their hands if we want a termination of our lives. And it's also interesting that some of the MPs who backed the bill in the common stages have said that the process was so torturous that they would not want to repeat it. And it's also interesting that it's only the House of Lords that is really doing this fine reading, because the parliamentary side, so the House of Lords is kind of like the last stop of due diligence. But so Parliament, they got this through very, very quickly with Kim Ledbetter MP, backbench MP, and this was a private bill. Anyway, it's now looking highly likely that it will fail. And as many people know around here, I've had very mixed feelings about this. Myself, if I were to suffer a significant accident, I've often thought I wouldn't necessarily want to carry on living if I was like unable to move, and if I really, I couldn't process things psychologically. But now, because I've seen the kind of people who want this into law, I absolutely cannot support it. I simply cannot support it. But Chris is for assisted dying. Let me read what Chris says. I am for assisted dying. I would like help myself, but in Scandinavia, it's not allowed. I think they've just made it legal in Jersey as well, which is interesting. Danielle said, please do the dark side of Branson. I think I said this on Friday's show, Danielle, that at any one moment in time, I have about a dozen files open, research files, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Esther Ranson's is one of them. Why doesn't the book of Esther mention God? I've no idea. And also, the other thing that it kind of links to what I'm saying as well, and that is the same people who push C-19, they're also pushing animal testing, right? And one of them in particular, Patrick Vallance, I think is an absolute disgusting, reprehensible individual. He was absolutely part of the C-19 hoax, and Labour, who cannot be trusted to do anything. And I speak as somebody who is politically homeless, but they cannot be trusted to do anything. And they said that they were going to be phasing out animal testing only 3 months ago. And Vallance, who is the Minister for Science, Innovation, Research and Nuclear, is a keynote speaker at an upcoming conference dedicated to promoting animal testing. The conference will take place in the West Midlands on the 9th and 10th of June this year. And they call it an openness conference, will focus on communicating the continued need for animal research. The name of the conference is deceptive. It is not open. Attendance is restricted to vetted individuals, as our friends at protesting outside MBR Acres. MBR Acres, of course, is the industrial beagle breeding facility in Cambridge that sells dogs for experiments. And what we do know is that Patrick Vallance was in talks with MBR Acres and their executives. This is a really problematic man. He has been for a very long period of time, and he's made a ton of money off the back of our misery. He's done financially very, very well for medicines sold in the UK. The fact that he's now a keynote speaker, well, on the one hand, the government are saying we are going to be phasing this out, shows how disgusting these people are. Poor beagles. Absolutely. It's absolutely disgusting, reprehensible behavior. I have just no time for these people, no time for them whatsoever. And I have to say very quickly that I do have deep concerns about Rupert Lowe's rape gang inquiry. And I'm going to be discussing that in more depth next week, because I'm going to be joined by somebody who testified at that inquiry. And my concern is pretty much the same as what Maggie Oliver has been saying about the government inquiry. And that is really problematic for survivors and victims to keep relaying what has happened to them, their trauma. That's really problematic. And I've been approached by a few people to do with the Rupert Lowe's rape gang inquiry. And some of it seems really problematic. I'm seeing people being attacked online. I saw Corrine, who is a survivor from Telford. She was a survivor of grooming gangs. She has a child as a consequence of being raped when she was being trafficked. She's been blocked by pretty much everybody now. Now, I don't know ultimately what's gone down, and I do know that survivors can be very difficult. It's not their fault, but can be very difficult to deal with. And I'm not saying that Corrine has or hasn't, but I am seeing that a number of survivors are really having problems with it. And my biggest problem is the launching of a political party immediately on conclusion of that inquiry. And I have a lot of problems with that, a lot. It feels very opportunistic, but it could well be that my guest next week has a completely different take on it. Around here, I do everything I can to bring in as many different voices as possible, not just people who agree with me, people who disagree with me. And next week's guest is almost certainly likely to disagree with me, but that doesn't make their voice any less important. Indeed, it makes it even more vital. And Stephen doesn't have any faith in any public institutions anymore. Gina doesn't understand how anyone can inflict pain on an innocent animal and be okay about it. Just how can they do it? It's sick. Well, I think they have to be psychopaths or sociopaths to do it. We've seen the kind of people who work at MBR Acres, and at the weekends they leave at like 10:30 in the morning and leave those poor beagle pups all on their own without kind of like, water or just facility. It's awful. It's horrendous what's going on. There needs to be an inquiry. Mark, you talking about the grooming gang now? Because I agree with you. There needs to be an inquiry, a professional investigation. It's gone too quick. Done with sensitivity, not a political point scoring exercise. I agree. And Jan, absolutely. That is the important thing. Jan says, I agree with what you say, Sonia. You do a great job, but some things I have a different opinion about. And that is what I really value. I value that. I don't want us to be an echo chamber where that doesn't serve anybody. You can go onto mainstream media and you know which ones are kind of like pro-Labour and which ones are pro-conservative and which ones are pro-reform or whatever, right? You can see that. Whereas I am genuinely politically homeless. I'm open to learning on a constant basis, but I cannot trust our politicians because I've seen too much of what they are capable of. And before we bring in our next guest, he's be arriving soon. Anybody see that new battle for Michael Jackson's fortunes? Interesting stuff. I did actually talk about Michael Jackson last week. I put a standalone video online about how I changed my mind about Michael Jackson. Now we hear from a family of 5 children, now adults, who claim they were all abused by Michael Jackson. Aldo Casio, along with 4 of his siblings, alleged Jackson groomed, manipulated, and sexually abused them over a 25-year period from the 1980s until his death in 2009. They are currently in a legal battle with Jackson's estate. The Casio family are seeking to void a confidential settlement. They insist they are not motivated by money, but by the truth. Michael Jackson's estate has made a ton of money since he died. His estate has generated some £2.2 billion sterling in revenue. The Casio family first encountered Michael Jackson in 1984 when their father Dominic was the manager of a hotel in New York where Michael Jackson often stayed. And the father introduced Jackson to his wife Connie and sons Frank, then 5 and Eddie 3. The couple went on to have 3 more children: Dominic, Mary, Nicole, and Aldo, who would stay with and without their parents at Jackson's Neverland Ranch in California. In 1993, when the Jordan Chandler allegations had emerged, when Michael Jackson was accused of abusing Geordie Chandler, and Michael Jackson ended up settling for millions. He settled out of court, and we talked about that in more detail and how that happened last week. So I will put a link in the video so you can see how that happened. From my perspective, what we were dealing with there was an opportunistic and greedy dad in the shape of Evan Chandler, who went on to take his own life. So clearly somebody who was struggling with a number of issues. And at the time that the Geordie Chandler allegation surfaced, the Cassio parents asked their children, has anything untoward happened between you and Michael? And they said absolutely not. So they then sent a fax, because that's what people used back in 1993. They sent a fax to Michael Jackson saying that they supported him. And he responded saying, I hope you guys are okay. It's all about extortion. Don't believe them. And Michael Jackson was really close to this family. Like in the wake of 9/11, he went to stay with them for 4 months. So, and he would join them for like Sunday roasts and stuff like that. But it's interesting. They also claim he was an alcoholic and drug addict. I'm struggling to believe some of these allegations because he was famously teetotal, although he did have a prescription drug addiction. We know that. But a lot of it is really problematic for me, and not least because of the period of time. But again, let's be very clear about this. And as someone myself who has worked with survivors of child abuse for a very long period of time, it can take a very long time for survivors to disclose for a number of reasons. And oftentimes survivors will disclose when the person has died. Well, he died 20 years ago. So that I'm struggling with, and especially the whole family now coming out. And we have seen that there has been a lot of opportunism and greed around this. I'm the last person to start accusing people who are saying that they are survivors of child abuse of being liars, of being frauds, but I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by this at all. And they said that they were pressured into signing a deal in 2020 by Jackson's estate without legal representation and before they understood their rights. Jackson's estate has said quite clearly that this is a shakedown. They are attempting a $213 million lawsuit, and as I say, described as a shakedown. This family have given Michael Jackson unqualified support, including writing a book about him, My Friend Michael, An Ordinary Friendship with an Extraordinary Man. It reminds me very much of obviously the two guys, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who were also very close to Michael. Wade Robson in particular was like the star witness defending Michael at trial. And then when he died, they came out with Leaving Neverland, claiming that he had abused them. And again, it is possible that survivors do that after the fact, but I am having a problem with an entire family of 5 coming out now and saying that. So I don't know what you think in the comments. Do tell me. What you will look for the wicked but will not find them. Hallelujah. Well, that sounds good. Everyone questioning Kerry, but no one ever questioned MJ's face. What was that? The system will take all the money. I think there's some truth there. Nikki thinks it's lies. I am struggling with it, Nikki, to be frank. Because, as I say, I'm taking into account all the things that I take into account, that it can take years for people to disclose. It really can. But for all 5 of them to be coming out is problematic. Marco said the vultures come swarming where money is involved. Lenticular Cloud said surely the siblings would talk to each other at the time and tell parents. Well, so apparently what kicked this all off was Aldo seeing the documentary Leaving Neverland and saying there's a real problem here. I went through this, and that's when it all opened up. And Ella Design said, morning, Sonia. He's starting to look innocent. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is that the more of this that piles in, the more it makes people have to go, hold on a second. Because to have made, what was it, 2.2 billion his estate since his death. I mean, there's a lot of people. And in the video that I put online last week, I talked to Tom Mesereau, who was obviously his defense lawyer. And Tom said it's just so opportunistic and greedy what these people do. Not talking about the Cassio family. He wasn't referring to them, but he was actually talking about Wade Robson and James Safechuck. Shin said he was innocent. He was a castrate. What's a castrate? Are you saying he was castrated? I have no idea what that means. He was a very troubled man, says Fun Times Forever. And his father was a really nasty man by all accounts. And I think this is what led to MJ's issues. It does come across as odd, but it's very hard to get to the truth with so much money and power dynamics at play. And that's the truth. Vendetta, cash cow. Oh, what's that? Cash cow for the record company. Sean says no evidence, so not guilty, simples. Michael was never a kiddie fiddler. He was a child himself, said Mary. He was a shrewd businessman, not a child, says Girl on Fire. Mesereau is a pretty badass lawyer, says somebody, and it's gone up too quickly. And Joanne says, so you could see, right? Really, oh, that was Christina. And Joanna said, if Michael Jackson wanted to abuse a kid, then why not buy one like other rich folks? Oh, Joanna. But we take your point, though. We take your point. Right. So how are you all? I hope you're well. We're going to be joined very, very shortly by Ben Habib, and I am very much looking forward to that. Before we do, anybody see that madness that's going on between Lucy Connolly and Femi? Both of them I consider really pretty much to be shills, whether they are financed or not. Lucy Connolly, of course, was the woman who's become the kind of cause celeb for reform. She was in prison, so we were told, for writing her racist tweet about setting fire to hotels with immigrants in. And Femi is just horrible and awful. And apparently they met on a train, and now they are talking about suing each other and doing all manner of things. I think Lucy is talking about suing him. But what are the chances that these two people, who many people consider to be shills, meet on a train? Interesting stuff, right? I thought that was quite interesting, frankly, quite interesting. Right, Ben has joined us. So I don't think we should wait for a moment, because I'm very grateful he's on time, and sounds good to me. Let us bring him in. How are you all in the comments? I hope you're well and enjoying this spring-like behavior. Isn't it glorious? I went out in the garden this morning. Absolutely glorious. We need more of this. Right, let's welcome in Ben. Here he is. Good morning, Ben. How are you?
Good morning. Very well indeed, thank you. Better for the weather. I think it's the first absolutely clear day we've had this year, isn't it?
It's absolutely glorious. I went out with my dog this morning, just let her out to do her duty. And it was absolutely lovely out there. And I just feel it. I feel spring is in the air, and it feels wonderful. I want to say, first of all, thank you for joining us, Ben. It's not easy. You're a politician, and politicians notoriously don't like live situations. Politicians have also failed to be transparent for a very long period of time. And I want to do things different around here. As I told you last week, I was in mainstream media for over 3 decades. I've seen how politicians are provoked by editors, by presenters into, slipping up or revealing something, negative about themselves. But that isn't what I want to do around here, because I feel that's very circular. I don't feel that we get anywhere. All it does is it creates media outrage for a day or two, but nothing really moves on. Whereas I think actually you showing up here today and being prepared to take live questions from my audience will at least enable people to have answers at their disposal, which is often in short supply. So thank you again for being here. You are, of course,
it's a pleasure,
the leader of Advance UK. You're a former member of the European Parliament. You are the former deputy of Reform UK. You founded Advance UK in 2025. You are a former Conservative Party donor. So I would take from all of that you're on the right of politics. Would that be a fair description?
Well, I think that's colloquially the right description, the right-hand side of politics. I think left-right is such a dated and actually no longer really applicable difference between the sort of main differences in politics. And we can discuss that perhaps if you like. But, I think the old left and the old right is not the divide. The real divide is between people who believe in this country, believe in making policies for this country, having borders, sovereignty, control, unashamedly being pro-British, and that's where I am. And then I think there's a whole load of other people who are kind of see prosperity for the globe, and through global integration, global cooperation, to the point where nation states cease to exist. And they're kind of pro-mass migration, pro the whole DEI, progressive discrimination, wealth redistribution as opposed to wealth creation kind of philosophy. So those are the two big camps, really.
I understand. So obviously you were with Reform UK. You've been talking about a potential merger with Restore UK. Now, if you go on to X, which I did, but not as often as I did used to. But if you go on to X, it feels very much like there is some sort of factional war taking place on there. And you seem to be often at the heart of it. Are you a divisive character, Ben?
I do not want to be at the heart of any divisive war. I think what's happened over decades is that we've forgotten that being pro-British, being proud of our history, being desirous for a largely settled, homogeneous culture. And the culture is the beating heart of a society and nation. We've forgotten that having these values and these beliefs are actually good things. And we've been so hijacked by the non-stop feeding to us of the notion that we must be good global citizens, that foreigners have every equal right to British citizens. In fact, we progressively discriminate in their favor over ourselves. We've been so hijacked by that and told repeatedly that unless we do put foreigners first, unless we do take our borders down and take all these people coming in dinghies, that we're somehow awful people. And quite the opposite is true. One can cooperate on the global stage, but do it as an independent nation rather than forgetting who we are as a country. And so I don't mean to be divisive. I just want people to understand that I think the best contribution actually that the United Kingdom can make globally is by being the sovereign state that it used to be. And I did a speech which was released yesterday in the Oxford Union in November, in which I talked in proud and correct terms, I think, of our imperial history and the great good we did across the globe. And nowadays, people would rather deride our imperial history, would rather say we're slave traders and so on. And, it's this non-stop traducing of who we are as a people that I stand against. And many people in the country have bought into this acceptance that we're somehow bad people. We've got a bad past. We were slave traders, and we should take our borders down, and we should let all the foreigners in, and we should integrate on the global stage as opposed to be independent and standing up for what we believe in our national interest, but cooperating, nevertheless. And it's just getting that debate. It's just having that debate without everyone throwing their toys out of a pram. And a lot of people, I think, when they've got what they believe to be a settled and correct ideology, aren't prepared to have it challenged. And that's when you get the division and the hate and well, sod you, I can't be bothered. And X is not a good platform for any nuanced form of debate. It's very, you got a number of characters that you can put on. People won't read beyond a certain limit, even if you purchase the blue tick.
Right.
And so you end up, in sound bites. Rather like you were saying, Sonia, in your opening remarks. Yeah.
Exactly that. And I'm so keen to get away from that, which is why I think it's also important to allow you to fully answer, because I literally just don't think we're getting anywhere with these kind of constant attacks and savaging. We need to hear what people who seek to represent us, what they think. That's what we need to do. So tell me, clarify to me what has happened between Advance UK and Restore. Will there be a merger?
I don't think so. I think that is firmly off for two reasons. The first is that Restore has made it abundantly clear that they do not want a democratic structure within their party. Rupert Lowe owns the party effectively, and that's precisely the structure that Reform had under Farage, which I disagreed with, and was one of the points that eventually moved me to resign from Reform. I don't think you can stand for the democratic unit of the United Kingdom, wish to empower the people of this country, bringing back accountability to Parliament and putting the people in charge. I don't think you can make that argument if your own political party isn't democratized, if you don't trust your members in your political party. I mean, you can have processes by which members can't just willy-nilly cause trouble. There can be processes, but there should be checks and balances, and the executive in a political party should be held to account, just as our representatives are able to do what they need to do, but are held to account. And Restore Britain doesn't want any of that. They want a party controlled by Rupert Lowe, and I think that is an inherently unsound way to construct a political party, or indeed any organization, Sonia. Any organization which relies on one individual is not going to succeed. You've got to have the ability to bring in other people and have these checks and balances and so on. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing, which has been the raging, really pretty vile debate on X over the last 3 or 4 days, has been this tilt of Restore Britain and some of the younger Turks, as I call them, round Rupert Lowe, towards ethno-nationalism. And, as much as I appreciate and understand that the white majority peoples in the United Kingdom have had their interests set aside for progressive discrimination, mass migration, etc. And I've been campaigning against that and the restoration of equality in the UK. I've been campaigning for that ever since I've been in politics. But you don't right that imbalance by then going so far over that you end up as an ethno-nationalist party. That's a
Right.
very, very dark alley to go down.
It's disturbing. I do want to get to that in more detail, because it's like you've lobbed a stick of dynamite in the middle of it all, and everybody's like, what does this all mean? And I have to say, you have been subjected to horrendous levels of racism. It is completely unacceptable, and it demeans anybody who is involved in that whatsoever. Completely unacceptable. But before I get to that, I just want to continue a little bit more about Rupert Lowe, because there was this conversation that happened about how you donated £5,000 to the rape gang inquiry, and then it was returned to you. Why was that? Why was it returned to you?
So it's really interesting, the timing of the release of the fact that £5,000 was returned to me. It only came to light or was made public by Lowe, by Rupert Lowe, absolutely. Even if it wasn't him who posted the thing on X, it would have been at his instigation. But that only came to light after our discussions to have an association collapsed. So they've tried to rubbish me with it, but I'll tell you what happened. In May last year, Rupert Lowe launched his rape gang inquiry, and he wanted to raise money, and I donated £5,000. That was in May 2025. And then in October 2025, I'd had no updates. I'd had nothing, no communication at all. And so I texted Sammy Woodhouse, who was one of the survivors and on Rupert Lowe's panel on the rape gang inquiry, and asked her, what gives? I've heard nothing. She texted it to Rupert Lowe. She forwarded my text, or sent some version of my text over to him. And I got a text from Rupert Lowe saying, if you want your money back, you can have it. And I said, I don't want my money back. I'm not asking for my money back. I'd just like an update. And anyway, he was quite hot under the collar. I said, I'll go and check. I'll check if I've had. He said, we sent emails out. Check your junk folder, which I think is a really bizarre response, Sonia. If someone's donated £5,000, you don't say check your junk folder. You say, look, I'm really sorry you haven't had an update. Updates have been going out. I'll have them resent to you instantly. Let me know if you don't get them. That's the kind of normal response you might expect. But I was told to go and check my junk folder. I checked my junk folder. I checked my rape gang folder, because I've got a little folder where I keep all, I break all my emails down into folders, and there was nothing there. So I texted him back and said, look, there's nothing there, but given your antipathy to my inquiry, and if you wish to, I'll take you up on your offer to return my money. That was in October. And he then sent my money back to me. And that was the end of it. And of course, I would support a good cause like a rape gang inquiry. Of course, I would do it. But it's completely wrong to suggest that, one, I shouldn't be entitled to inquire as to what's going on. Completely wrong. The reaction to it was completely wrong. And the notion that I asked for my money back is completely misrepresented.
I think that's important to cover that, because people have said that to me before and over the weekend, but he asked for money back for a rape gang inquiry. And I don't think that's actually what happened. So thank you for clarifying that. I think that's important. I also want to move next to Gorton and Denton. That was a bit of an interesting scenario last week. Of course, Greens got in, Greens won, Reform were up there. I'm just looking at the polling now. For the Gorton and Denton result. And you tweeted, listening to the pundits on telly, everyone talking about a collapse in Labour support. Rubbish. Greens won because of mass migration and the Islamization. Goodness, that's a bit of a word, isn't it? Of Gorton.
Islamisation.
There you go. Of Gorton and Denton. Welcome to Britain. And just to refer to Kemi Badenoch, obviously leader of the Conservative Party, says Labour has been bitten by its own monster of mass harvesting Muslim votes. So that sounds very much that you are both in an accord on this. What are your thoughts about what took place there last week?
So I think Gordon and Denton is a wake-up call for a number of reasons. Before we get to block voting and the way, Muslim communities
Families.
vote, before we get there, there's something else that's taking place, which we need to talk about. Everyone says the turnout in Gordon and Denton in the general election was 49%. The turnout the other day in by-election was 48%. Actually, that's quite a high turnout, by the way, for a by-election. That's quite a high turnout. Often they're down as low as 36, 37%. Anyway, 48%. And people think, okay, well, the turnout's roughly the same. And the turnout numerically was roughly the same. But the composition of the turnout, in my mind, was dramatically different. What we had in 2024 was a Green Party that was not representing the Muslim community back then. It's adopted its Muslim representation since then. And the Labour Party was obviously had a much broader message and was pulling on a broader cross-section of people. We've also had, more migration since then, but I don't think that's the key point. I think the key point here is that the Green Party is now the de facto Muslim party. And the Muslim constituencies in communities in Gordon and Denton, and I think something between 27 to 30% of Gordon and Denton is Muslim. They came out in force to support the Greens, and the rest of the vote was probably much lower. As the number of people who voted, the people who voted in 2024 generally probably didn't vote in the same numbers in this by-election, but the Muslim community came out in force, and that changed the result dramatically. Everyone was thinking, well, Reform's polling at around 30%, Greens are polling at around 27%. It's going to be a very close run thing. But when you do a poll like that, when you go out and ask people questions, there's no there's no weighting made for the propensity for that individual to actually vote. And the propensity for the Muslim community to vote is much, much higher when they've got a representative, which they now do have in the Green Party. And so people like John Curtis, who've been talking about, a thumping majority for reform at the next general election, are not thinking straight because they're not taking into account the way the underlying numbers of turnout are changing in this country. Just because Reform is polling at 30% nationally and Labour's down at 20, that's no indication that actually it's Reform that's going to get the majority, because the way people are behaving is entirely different. Their voting behaviour is entirely different now that the Greens represent the Muslim community. And that block vote then, just coming to that block vote, is also dramatically influencing the way things happen. And of course, it's illegal. You can't be going into a polling booth with your wife and making sure she ticks the appropriate box. But try enforcing that. That's the difficulty. And what we've allowed to happen is the cultural disposition of the British people to be law-abiding when it comes to voting. That cultural disposition has been set aside through mass migration and through effectively women being in the control of their husbands in those communities.
Right.
And we've got a mountain to climb in this country to get back to a settled, which is why I started my discussion about culture. It's all about culture. It's about having people in the country who recognize, for example, that women should be free to vote as they wish to when they go into a polling booth. That's a cultural thing.
It is a cultural thing. Let's get to that then, because as I say, it was like you lobbed a hand grenade into the middle of proceedings over the weekend. Now, there was that conversation which took place, I think, on GB News with Nana Akua, and it was to do with about being English and who is English. Now, you were born in Karachi. I think I've got that correct. You lived there until your teen years. Your mum is white English, I think blonde, blue eyes. So you are mixed race, right? So what is the problem with calling yourself that? And let me just have clean hands here, Ben, just so that we're absolutely clear where I'm coming from. And that is, my daughter is mixed race. And I don't consider either myself, because I'm of Irish, Welsh kind of origin. I've never called myself English. I called myself much more kind of British, and I don't call my daughter English either. Yet you do call yourself English. Talk to me about that.
So I feel English, and I think this is a very, so just before I address that, it's a wonderful debate to have. Who is English? Who is it's a perfectly sensible and reasonable debate to have, particularly given how our sense of identity has been set aside over decades through mass migration, progressive discrimination, etc. It's a wonderful debate to have. But as a political party, you can't be making policies based on someone's ethnicity, particularly in the United Kingdom. And the reason I say that is that if you were to go to Japan, the cultural settlement in Japan is very closely linked to the ethnic settlement. They haven't really ever gone out of their borders and done anything remotely close to what the United Kingdom has done. The United Kingdom has been an expansive country over its history. We had the biggest empire. Every member of the empire was a British subject. And by your own description of yourself, you've got a bit of Irish in you. You've got, I don't know, I can't remember the exact mix you described, but
Welsh.
you know, you're not pure blood English. And there are very, very few pure blood English people.
Exactly that. Right.
You know,
because it's an ethnic group, right? It's a nation native to England. And in many respects, neither you or I are native to England in some respects, right?
I'm definitely not. And I'm visually not native to England. But my mother was English. I was brought up to believe that I'm English. When I go to Scotland, I know I'm in the United Kingdom, but I feel I'm in Scotland, that I'm no longer in England. And England is my home. And I've always thought of myself as English. I'm culturally English. The English heroes, particularly English heroes, I mean, they're British heroes as well, of course, but I absolutely associate with English heroes. I understand what a tremendous force England has been, as distinct from the other parts of the United Kingdom in our history. And I associate with that culturally. I don't care what Charlie Downs or anyone else has to say about it. Sure, ethnically, I'm not English, but culturally, I am English.
Culturally.
And you may choose, Sonia, you may choose not to feel English culturally.
Right.
But who the hell are we to try and tell Nana Akua? Nana Akua is of our disposition completely. She is pro-British. She understands how mass migration has set aside the white majority. She is completely against the rate of demographic change that's taking place in this country. She's black, but she is completely against the way the white indigenous population has been treated. She's culturally English, just as I am. And why would we tell her she's a second-class individual in this country? You're second-class just by virtue of the fact that you're black.
Appalling, absolutely appalling. I mean, I'm literally just talking about kind of like the facts of the matter, about, as I say, about it being a very specific group. But I think you've taken on a bit of a challenge, Ben. And the reason I say that is that, to a degree, your audience have rediscovered nationalism, right? And they're hearing lots of talk about Pakistani grooming gangs. I mean, this is an immense challenge that you're attempting to overcome. And as I say, some of the comments that I've seen directed at you and your family, I think are truly abysmal and atrocious. They shouldn't represent anybody, frankly. And it's always interesting that often they're anonymous anyway. So, but it is a bit of a challenge. I mean, do you accept that your audience are not necessarily leaning towards where you're coming from at this moment in time?
No, but I mean, you're looking at the audience on X, and I think the vast majority of British people are not racist. And, you know, I denounce racism in all its colours. And there's no place for racism in a political party. You know, there just cannot be. Because if you start making policies for white people at the exclusion of everyone else, or a particularly, and actually, sorry, it's even worse than that, Sonia. What's being advocated by some of the young Turks in Restore Britain is not even policies in favour of white people. It's policies in favour of a very narrow English ethnicity, their very narrow definition of it. And that is discrimination at a political level. And that will mean that we'll go down, for example, in a very one of the immediate consequences of that will be that the Scots will say, well, we're Scottish, rightly, and the Welsh will say politically we want to be Welsh, and the Ulster nationalists will say, well, we want Ulster to be ours. And what you've then done is promote a whole load of anti-union voices into being. You will end up very quickly saying, well, the Scottish National Party is fine. You know, we recognise Scotland wants to be its own identity. We can't hold Scotland to England. We would end up breaking the United Kingdom. And I stand for the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a phenomenal country. And we won't improve ourselves. We won't reassert ourselves as a nation if we start breaking ourselves up. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so, as unpopular as it might seem, I have to stay true to it. Can I just give you one quick example
Of
as well, if I
course.
may, before we move to the next question? The lady I married is half English. Her father, her grandfather came from Russia, and her grandmother came from Scotland. So my ex-wife is half English, a quarter Russian, and a quarter Scottish. I'm half English and half Pakistani. I have two sons. One son, but both sons are obviously half English, a quarter Pakistani, an eighth Russian, and an eighth Scottish. Behold one of my sons. But both sons are culturally entirely English. They went to private school here. They went to university here. They look and they behave entirely in an English way. My first son, my firstborn, is white. My other son is brown. It's just the way the genetics
Yeah,
worked.
of course.
I mean, so would you look at my first son and say, well, he's all right, he can stay because he looks and feels like us. But the other one, even though he's identical in his DNA makeup, but he's got a brown tint, would you deport him? This is just a really bad route to go down for a political
I
party.
hate the way it's all going. I absolutely, truly do. I've been absolutely anti-racist for the longest period of time. And I truly loathe what's happening. I feel it very divisive. I feel that we're being pitted against each other. So I absolutely hear you. So the other thing so moving on, Rupert Lowe had said that Britain has enough problems. We should not be bombing Iran. You, on the other hand, have been very fulsome in your support. In fact, I'm going to quote you. You said the regime must now be crushed. No quarter given. Get rid of its disgusting theocracy once and for all. So, I mean, you're unequivocal there, aren't you?
Absolutely unequivocal. But before I answer that, can I just say I was very against the war in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was essentially a secular guy holding Iraq in control. He was a barbaric individual, but he didn't pose immediately a threat to the West. He was, in many ways, during the 1980s, an instrument of the West against Iran. Now, Iran is behind a dark curtain. It is controlled by dictatorial theocracy that doesn't recognize women's rights, that hates the West, that has fomented trouble throughout the Middle East. It funds Hamas, it funds Hezbollah, it funds foreign terrorism. There have been a number of terrorist acts on our soil sponsored by Iran. And if Iran were to get the nuclear bomb, it would be our interest that would be seriously threatened. They would use it against us. This is not a replay of Iraq. This is not a replay of the Arab Spring, where we encouraged, in my mind, unnecessary change in the Middle East to adopt our form of democracy because we thought, General, what was his name? I can't remember, the chap in charge of Egypt. It'll come back to me, but they had a general, and we forced Egypt into a democracy through the Arab Spring, and we got the Muslim Brotherhood taking control. And Syria, Assad was a bastard, absolutely. But Syria has been reduced to a pile of rubble because of our misconceived notion in the Arab Spring in 2011. This is very different to Iraq or the Arab Spring. This is targeting a regime which would absolutely obliterate the West, would obliterate our interests, would seek to destroy us. And they must go. This theocracy in Iran must go. It's a good thing to get rid of them. It's in our interest to get rid of them. And actually, Starmer has been absolutely useless on it. You know, we had an RAF base attacked overnight in Cyprus, and he's still not saying he's going to join in. I mean, what kind of country have we become?
We have joined in already, haven't we? We are supply.
We've reluctantly allowed the Americans to use Diego Garcia,
right,
and British bases. But
right.
Actually, we should be standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States and saying, yeah, the theocracy's got to go. I mean, look at this regime. It bombed Qatar, it bombed Bahrain, it bombed Saudi, it bombed the UAE, and none of those people were involved in the conflict. it's a crazy regime.
The problem we have, Ben, and I admit this as a journalist, is we have so much information that we cannot tell the provenance of it or whether we can rely on it. And there's so much AI generated content of videos, it's very difficult to know. So on one hand, we see Iranians cheering at the death of the Ayatollah, and on the other, we see them weeping and wailing. And I just find it very, very difficult to cut through all of that and really find out what's really happening. But one thing I do know, and I think this leads us very neatly into the next part, because I discovered that when I asked my viewers what questions they would like to ask you, it broadly broke down into about 4 or 5 categories. And one of them included Israel. And a lot of people are talking about Israel, obviously, in relation to Iran and what has taken place in Israel and the US as one example. And I'm going to refer to a question from Peter Folder. I believe he's in the comments. And he said, Ben appears to be pro-Israel, but what does he think should happen to the Palestinians? Does he believe that there should be a Palestinian state? And what about the Palestinians being displaced that has happened ever since the Nakba and is still happening in the West Bank? Does he believe they should have their homes and land returned to them? And I know we're moving on from Iran, but obviously all Middle East. How do you respond to what Peter has to say there?
So I have great sympathy for any family, any society, any peoples that has been stuck in a conflict as the Palestinians have since 1948. It's an absolutely wretched situation that the Palestinians face. I'm neither pro-Palestinian nor pro-Israel in that sense. I want peace in the Middle East. But you will not get peace in the Middle East when you have bad actors like Iran funding Hamas. Hamas is a snake. It's a snake. It needs to be beheaded. Hezbollah is a snake. It needs to be beheaded. And Israel fights for its life and is fighting for its life. It's in a constant fight for its life. And I find it amazing how people are able to conflate the plight of the Palestinian people with Hamas and basically provide their support to Hamas. In the war that's taken place between Hamas and Israel, a lot has been said about the plight of the Palestinian people, but no criticism is made, as far as I can see, by those who would support the Palestinian people against Hamas. Hamas, if it cared about the Palestinian people, should disband. It should give up. There are more Palestinians working in Israel than there are in Gaza, in terms of working population. It was a perfectly fluid and capable of being settled situation. It's not Israel that is fomenting trouble. It is Hamas, Hezbollah, and all of that. They can be a settlement, but people have to get over the grievance politics of 1948 and the displacement, the so-called displacement. We can have a debate about it in 1948, and move on to the fact that we're now in 2026, and people are losing their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their cousins, their daughters, and sons. And we've got to stop that, and then we've got to build Gaza back up into a prosperous state which isn't run by a terrorist organization. And I'm not sure that the route to that is democracy for the Palestinian people. I think they need to be taken action. The reason Hamas are there is in 2006 they had an election and Hamas won the election, and it was not a good result for the Palestinians. So it's a very difficult situation.
Extremely difficult, extremely emotive. Lots of bad faith players on all sides, I feel. Emma says, should British taxpayers fund foreign countries?
Well, at the moment, I imagine she's talking about aid, foreign aid, as opposed to...
I imagine so.
Yeah. So, first of all, I've always been against aid rather than trade. I think aid often doesn't get to where you wish it to go. Again, the countries that need the aid have a lot of, as you say, bad actors who take a hell of a lot of the money out of the pot before it ever gets to where we need it to go. And aid doesn't enable people to improve their own lot. It puts a sticking plaster on a wound. It doesn't heal the wound. And I know this from firsthand experience, partly because of my partly Pakistani background. And much better to trade with countries. And one of the criticisms I have of the European Union is that it has a mercantilist approach to trade, and it never really engaged properly with countries when it trades. It imposes sanctions on countries that can't afford to pay those sanctions. Tariffs, sorry, forgive me, tariffs on countries that can't afford to pay those tariffs. And then we do something even more stupid in this country. We conflate trade with our political aims. And we say, well, we'll trade with you, but only if you democratize your country, you do this, you do that, you do X, Y, and Z. We'd be much better off saying, look, it's better for England if we trade with you better for the United Kingdom if we trade with you in this way. And by the way, I'm also, before we go down too much of a trade discussion, I do believe in British jobs first. Offshoring jobs to India, to China has not been a good approach. This entire tilt towards global free trade that we've had over the last 30 years, that hasn't had a nice and happy outcome. But there can be trade, which is on a more equitable basis that enables countries like Pakistan to get more prosperous, and through their prosperity, then not need aid, and also through their prosperity and trade with us, look to us rather than looking to China or looking to other bad forces in the world. That's a much better way to do it. And, we were so good at this. The United Kingdom was so good at it, and we've become so bad at it.
One of the issues that deeply concerns my viewers and me also is the infiltration of other countries regarding the UK, regarding British politics, and probably none more so in some respects than Israel. So Christine asks a question, and that is, do you agree that a politician who receives money from Israel directly or indirectly should be considered treasonous? What do you say to that? And I have to ask you, what is your involvement? Do you receive money directly or indirectly from Israeli lobby groups? I mean, just in because we're having a wonderfully transparent, important conversation here, and I think it has some value, Ben. How do you respond to that?
I'm in the awful position of politics just costing me a whole load of money and having no income. No income. Well, I get a few £100, I think, from X every month because when you get a blue tick and you get money depending on. So I get a few £100, but I put hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly £1 million so far into my political endeavours, and I've had no money out of it. I'm certainly not in the pay of anyone. Not in the pay of anyone. If I were to make a parliamentary declaration for the Register. I'm not an MP, so there would be no money coming into my pockets other than from my salary as chief executive of a public company. And you can go online and have a look at it. First Property Group PLC. All my earnings are clear, and I make a few £100 from X.
You're unequivocal there, no doubt about it. So in answer to her question, do you agree that politicians who receive money from Israel directly or indirectly should be considered treasonous?
I think if you're in an elected position, you shouldn't be taking money from any foreign power, first of all, as a politician. And in an elected position, I don't think you should have all these outside interests to the extent that they do have them. There's one, Nigel Farage, let's name him. He's got millions of outside interest. And you just got to wonder who is pulling his strings. Because if you've got to, with people, it's human nature to bend to those who pay you, which is the purpose of the question, which is the direction of the question, no doubt.
Absolutely.
And when I look at Farage's register of interest, I just think, this guy cannot possibly be representing the United Kingdom. You should really just get your MP salary. Really, you should just get your MP salary.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree, because the moment that anything else comes into the equation, it potentially compromises you. And that's the last thing we need from the people who are supposed to be representing us. Thank you for being very, very transparent about that. I very much appreciate it. Some more quick questions. Thank you very much for your time. I've gone over a little bit. Stop Fluoridation wants to know, what is your party's fluoridation policy? Do you have a fluoridation policy?
We're in the middle of making policies at the moment. We haven't got to fluoridation yet. We think there are significant fundamental problems this country needs to address. We need a 180-degree direction turn in the way the country's governed. And we're really dealing with these massive issues. Fluoridation, I imagine, is a concern that we're sort of being fed crap by the government. And, our bodies are being poisoned. And we haven't got there. But if there's any kind of poisoning taking place, and I think people are worried about chemtrails and they're worried about other stuff. I'm not an expert in any of this. We will get there in the end. And we do have experts in the party, which is another reason why a party should be democratized and have other voices in it. We have a college. I don't know if you're aware of that, Sonia. A
I
college of
wasn't.
people. Yeah, we have a college of people who hold me to account, but they also act as the intellectual ballast to create policies. And I've got greater minds than mine coming up with policies, and no doubt this will be addressed in due course.
Lenticular cloud, I think, speaks for many of us, and that is thank you for coming on the show. It's so important what you've been prepared to do, Ben, and brave, actually, because you have no idea what we're going to throw at you at any one moment in time. So just one more, I think, and that is Rachel Matthews said, I'd like to know your position on GovUK One login. Would you scrap it?
So this is basically digital ID, is it, at Companies House, where you have to give over your details and give confirmation statements every year to Companies House. They've got all your. Are you able to ask if that's the purpose, if that's the drive of the? Is that the underlying question?
I suspect so. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I do stand against it. I'm absolutely I am, as I mentioned, I'm a director of a public company, chief executive of a public company. And we have subsidiaries in the company, and I've had to give over. And there's no way I cannot do it because I have obligations to my shareholders. I've had to give over personal information. Effectively, this is digital ID through the back door, and I can't move now without these guys having all my biometric and other details. And I think it's horrendous. We need to get rid of this out of the fabric of British business. It's also another massive regulation. It's constraining. It stops us from making money. It's not good.
Right, I've got you. I do want to ask one more, if you don't mind. Monica Skinner said, I'd like to know about Ben's policy for European nationals with indefinite leave to remain who are married to British citizens. And I know that Monica is married to a British citizen. As she says, I am one of them, and there are several within my husband's family. Any foreign national in the same position would probably like to know.
So we have got a policy on indefinite leave to remain, and we have got a policy on spouses. Our policy on indefinite leave to remain is that it will no longer be granted going forward to anyone. Any indefinite leave to remain that's been granted since 2019 will be reversed back to 2019 because we have to get rid of the Boris wave. But spouses will be allowed to stay, obviously. They will have settled status, and they will have the ability, they will have settled status, but we also have something called a residence covenant. And a residence covenant requires people, for example, when they're in this country, not to promote foreign countries, not to be politically active, not to proselytize for a particular religion, and so on and so forth. And we would expect all spouses, foreign spouses living in this country who don't hold a British passport, so they're still foreigners, living in this country to comply with our residence covenant.
Ben, you should do this more often. You should see the sheer volume of questions that I have. And I'm going to ask one final one. DJ Markson says, mRNA vaccine damage. What's your stance?
It needs, so what we don't need is a £360 million inquiry into COVID lockdowns, which just basically reinforced all the ideology that supported lockdowns and vaccines without actually asking any of the pertinent questions. There is clearly now building up an unrefutable amount of evidence that vaccine has done a lot of damage to a lot of people, and we need a proper investigation into that. And those who knew that the vaccine could cause the kind of side effects that it's caused and death in some people, they need to be held to account. The one thing the parliamentarians, and I think we let them off with this, governments, the minute the going gets a bit tough, they launch an inquiry. And it's very clever, and we all go, okay, great, they're going to do an inquiry. Well, 3 years later, they produce a document that's 500 pages long without any definitive conclusions or action points. Right. And we've got to get away from inquiries to accountability. And it goes to the gang rape thing too. Forget about an inquiry on the gang rape thing. Establish a part of the constabulary that is empowered and directed to go and arrest everyone, obviously, who's a rapist, but also those who held positions of a responsibility and turned a blind eye or
No.
allowed it to happen on their watch. Get them bloody arrested, charge them, and incarcerate them. Forget the inquiry. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I'm going to let you go because you have been an absolute star. I asked you for 20 minutes. You've done 45. We still have a ton of questions coming in, but we don't have time for them. But I thank everybody who sent in questions for Ben. But most of all, I want to thank you, Ben. As I say, you have no idea what is going to happen when you rock up in a place live and facing live questions. And I really hope that you have now set precedent where other politicians are prepared to follow what you've been done today. You've set a good example, everybody. This is Ben HABIB from Advance UK. Ben, thank you for your time. Wonderful.
Thank you. And thank you for the questions. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I very much appreciate what he's been prepared to do today. How are you all? Thank you, Ben, very much, says Mark Book. Thank you, Ben, says Shug. Glennis says, thank you, Ben. Drumstick says, thank you, Ben. And Marco says, thanks, Ben. He's coming across well. And interesting stuff, right? Interesting stuff. I just think the most important thing is to allow somebody the opportunity to answer questions without wanting to fight with them. I'm not necessarily in the business here of just wanting to fight with people, right? I actually genuinely want to hear what people have to say, because oftentimes people either float or hang themselves with their own words, right? Thank you, Ben, says Nikki. Brilliant. He makes so much sense, says Yellow Rose. Well, I very much appreciated that. I truly did. Right. I want to move on. I want to talk about Operation All. Lenticular Cloud says, Ben is English. Markson says, a lot of fluff. Right, I want to talk about Operation OR. Are you familiar with Operation OR? Operation OR was the largest computer crime investigation in the history of the United Kingdom. It was launched in 2002 to crack down on the purchase of online child abuse material. And I believe it was Kira who asked me to look at this. So thank you, Kira. Thank you for reminding me about the calamitous mess in parts that Operation OR was. So it commenced following information received from US law enforcement, which was intended to prosecute thousands of users of a website reportedly featuring child abuse images. Operation OR, we were told, led to 7,250 suspects identified, over 4,000 homes searched, over 3,000 arrests, over 1,000 charged, over 1,000 convictions, 493 cautioned, 140 children removed from suspected dangerous situations, and an estimated 39 suicides. Operation OR identified and prosecuted some sex offenders, but the validity of the police procedures was later questioned, frankly. An error, and what happened was an error in the information that they were gathering actually resulted in many false arrests and probably led to some of those suicides. So let me just talk to you a little bit about it. Operation OR began after the FBI shared a database of thousands of British credit card details, which was linked to a US company called Landslide Productions, which was a Texas-based website portal used to access child abuse images. And what happened was it identified over 7,000 suspects across various walks of life, including police officers, teachers, doctors, high-profile celebrities. And Thomas and Janice Reedy were the operators of Landslide Productions in Texas. And it was their conviction that led to the discovery of the subscriber list. And it was sort of headed up by Detective Chief Inspector Bob McLachlan, and that was the former head of Scotland Yard's paedophile unit, one of the main officers involved in the investigation. But there were other officers involved in the investigation. From the perspective of Parliament, Hilary Benn was the Home Office Minister at the time who oversaw the government's response. And what happened was the FBI initiated the original investigation known as Operation Avalanche. And as I say, it targeted a Texas-based website. And what it did was it produced all these credit card details of primarily men, British men, who were accessing this site. And so they believed that these men were accessing this website of horrendous child abuse images. And we're talking, I mean, it's all horrendous, obviously, but they have categories for a reason. And these were category ones that were also being accessed. but there was a lot of controversy about it, a huge amount of controversy. So one of the problems was critics and legal experts argued that many individuals on the list were victims of identity theft or credit card fraud, meaning they had never actually access the material in the first place. And there were numerous innocent people stigmatized, which led to obviously lost careers, destroyed reputations, and suicides. I mean, no doubt whatsoever that some of those suicides will have included potentially innocent people. The police were absolutely savaged in court. British police, they were accused of having a gung-ho approach and a failure to account for digital fraud. And what was often happening was, rather than these people actually being nonces, they were victims of fraud. They were victims themselves. And Duncan Campbell, an investigative journalist at the time, was very interested because he'd also done defense on a number of cases. And he did a series of articles, and the issue of credit card fraud was absolutely the subject of it. And Campbell found evidence that the hosts of third-party web pages linked to Landslide had used the portal to process payments to themselves from stolen cards. And in other words, so credit card companies tried to recoup funds from a fraudulent transaction, and Reedy, who was eventually convicted, would have to pay rather than the fraudsters operating the third-party sites. And Landslide became a magnet for fraud because this was people's stolen credit cards that were being used on there. And add to that the atmosphere that was taking place in the UK. And I'm one of the first people to say, go nail those pedos, absolutely. But I also don't want innocent people nailed either. And the UK police were absolutely overzealous. And there were many critics of Operation Or, although not Jim Gamble, who was former head of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command, also known as CEOP at the time. He was a prominent defender of Operation Or and a spokesperson for the operations methods in its later years. He called the operation a huge success, blamed a nonsense conspiracy theory for tarnishing its reputation. I'm proud of Operation Or, he said, and I'll be proud of it on the day I die. In a 2007 statement to the House of Lords, Gamble said that of more than 2,450 people successfully held to account, 93 had admitted their guilt. But there was a problem with that as well, because Gamble also stood by this remark that we never prosecute someone simply on the basis of their credit card being used on Landslide. Well, that was proven not to be true. Not to say that he was lying, he may just been unaware, but it was proven to be untrue. And I say that because, for example, there was a doctor who was tried in Hull in 2004 where the police found absolutely nothing to incriminate this doctor. No pictures, no emails, no trace, no nothing. However, there were credit card transactions in the doctor's name via the Landslide site. And the doctor was tried for incitement. He'd done nothing, but because somebody had stolen his credit card details, he was tried for incitement. And that is what's happened to a lot of those people who were swept up in Operation Or. Mary is reminding me that Gamble was very much involved in the Madeleine McCann case. Yes, indeed he was, Mary. And what was interesting was between Operation Or and then Madeleine McCann went missing and Gamble leapt on the she's been abducted. And then a month after, so Gamble is like, Operation Or is an absolute success. We're rounding up all these people. Then in May 2007 was the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And by June 2007, Jim Gamble, and the article is still online, was online saying action, not jail for paedophiles. He said that what we should be doing is cautioning people who are downloading child abuse images. Well, that's an interesting turn of events. But yes, thank you for reminding me of that. It's a very interesting turn of event. There were, of course, a number of notable suspects to do with Operation Or. That included Pete Townsend, the Who guitarist who was arrested, later cleared of possessing illegal images. He was cautioned, placed on the sex offenders register for 5 years after admitting he accessed the site for research. Didn't buy it then, don't buy it now. And because the bottom line is, if you access, whatever your supposed reason is. Chris Langham, I don't know if you know him. He's a British actor, comedian. He was convicted of downloading indecent images. He was sentenced to prison. A completely innocent, falsely accused individual was Robert Del Naja from Massive Attack, also known as 3D. I know those guys. I've interviewed those guys. And Robert was arrested and searched, later had all charges dropped. And it's so they took away all, his property. The police raided his home, removed video and computer equipment, and found that he was a victim of fraud. The Operation Ore over the years has been met with much fanfare, but how much did the British police actually get wrong? And rather a lot, actually. There was, as I say, a very gung-ho approach to it. I think that it will be remembered in time as an operation where thorough due diligence was absolutely failed, because you can't get the lives back of people who have taken their lives because they're being accused of downloading child abuse. What a harsh caution. What a harsh punishment. I think Humphrey is being sarcastic. So really problematic. The computer experts employed by the police claimed in court cases they could find no evidence of hacking or fraud when credit card details were provided to these porn sites. But when Dr. Sam Type of Geek Limited was asked during one case held at Northampton Crown Court whether she had looked for evidence of fraud, she replied, "No, I didn't. No, I haven't specifically looked for it." So these expert witnesses were not being asked to look for fraud. And it turned out that fraud was a major player in this. Yes, Glennis, mud sticks. Yes, indeed. So I think we're going to look back on that, be deeply concerned about it. But I urge you, if you want to find out more about it, do search out the work of Duncan Campbell, freelance investigative journalist. I'm not even sure if he's still alive now, but he did some absolute sterling work, and more power to his elbow. And Kira, I hope that's answered your sort of query in one respect or not. Now, if everything goes to plans, people, we should be doing a live broadcast to Amsterdam next Monday for a court hearing regarding expert witnesses in the case against Bill Gates. Now, the trial may start in the summer, and this hearing is about expert witnesses, Dr. Mike Yeadon, Sasha Latipova, and Catherine Austin Fitz. There's a press conference afterwards, and hopefully, prior to them all going in to do with their expert witnesses, we should be doing a live feed to Amsterdam. Yes, Cheryl, imagine someone using your credit card for that. Absolutely gutting. Awful stuff. Awful stuff. Your shout, Russell Ruckman has been in touch with us, saying a quick one, and pointed out to me that the government are onto and talking about charging people in van life for council tax, right? So Russell, like me, watches quite a lot of videos to do with van life, and I like it. I don't like the idea that we're slowly getting priced out of our homes and into spaces like caravans and vans. But what they are looking to do is people who are dwelling in vans, they have these things called meanwhile sites, certainly in places like Bristol, and they are already being charged council tax in their vans and in their caravans. And this is looking likely to be extended across the country. So it's not enough that people are being priced out of their homes and having to live in their vans and caravans. They're now having to pay council tax. Yes, Senton, I know, but some of them aren't. They're at these meanwhile sites, and the meanwhile sites are intended to allow them to just kind of stabilize for a little bit. An illegal tax in the first place. I love the van life videos. Do you, Gina? I do too. Thank you, Cheeky Sprite. I very much appreciate that. I want to talk about this before we go today because it's really important. I was contacted by a man called Andrew, very distressed father, who told me about his child being ill, but the NHS ignoring them. And Andrew says that their son, who is now 19, has POTS. Do you know what POTS is? I probably can't pronounce it correctly, but I'm going to do my best. Postural tachycardia syndrome. And what it is, it's when your heart rate increases very quickly after getting up from sitting or lying down. It often makes people feel dizzy or lightheaded. Andrew went on to explain to me that there's officially 4 types of POTS. They overlap each other regarding symptoms, which is the crux of the problem with respect to diagnosis. And the reason that they absolutely know that their son has POTS is because he's endured every test for it twice. And he's been through the investigations, and they say that their son's pediatrician at the time first proposed the idea of POTS to us 6 years ago. And they said that he was beyond thorough with his investigation, was convinced that POTS was the problem. So did the GP. And in 2021, the neurologist in Cardiff categorically ruled out problems. And then they say that the NHS from that point onwards always wanted to place the problems to your son has mental health problems, your son has epilepsy. And they're like, he's been through the tests for POTS, he has POTS, you need to diagnose him now. And it seems that part of the problem that this family are enduring is that the medical health professionals that they've dealt with don't know what POTS is. They've had to instruct doctors and nurses what POTS is. What a terrible state of affairs. And Andrew recalled one night when their son was in hospital, they were left to monitor him themselves. And the cardiologist put him on propranolol as an observation trial. Andrew and his wife were left to stare at the value on the monitor to make sure that it didn't drop below 10. This is abysmal treatment that they are receiving. They say that the last 4 years have been hell. In America, they say they're able to detect POTS at age 10 to 12, treat it so kids don't miss their education and teenage life, which is more than what's happened with their son. So they say that they've had every test redone, same specialists, and POTS was the conclusion from every medical faction. Then he got lost in the system. They had to literally take him to A&E many times through the year. He was vomiting, he was collapsing, he was sweating, he was grey-skinned. It's insane. They filmed it all. They photographed it all, every detail. And it's just awful. Some of the things that happened, as one example, they brought him around by hanging him upside down and administering cortisone via a drip. This is awful stuff, Glenys. Awful stuff. Poor kid, says Fun Times. The hell that this family has been through. And last year, their son turned 18. He's now 19. He missed his GCSE exams due to POTS. And now they are forced to ask themselves, if something happens to us, he has to find a means of support financially and live his life. In autumn, they thought their luck was finally in. They had found someone who was going to treat him. And then they were told that they were out of the catchment area. It was a 28-mile difference. Their son is being denied treatment based on a 28-mile difference. The impact on this family has been incalculable. Their family are in bits. That, as he says, I'm sure you can understand the friction and bust-ups that such stress can cause. It splits us up. Turned our daughter against our son because she doesn't understand the illness. She also has major issues. And I suffered a heart attack at 49. My wife is the sole provider and is mentally and physically destroyed. This is awful. This is awful stuff, Vendetta. Awful stuff. Their son is perilously low in weight and he's wasting away. He's 19 and he weighs 6 stone, 11 ounces. For goodness sake, they have to carry their son to the doctor. He's bed-bound. His health is deteriorating fast. And they were hoping that there would be some sort of speed up. And now they've been told they have to wait 15 months for a diagnosis from the neurologist. And then maybe they'll diagnose him with POTS. It's horrendous. This is absolutely terrible healing guidance. M says, Clive de Carl. And what it really comes down to is that the National Health Service have absolutely failed. They didn't know enough about POTS. They passed him from pillar to post. They lost notes. They lost him in the system. And now, for the sake of a catchment area of 28 miles, they are making him now wait 15 months. I'm shocked. I'm shocked. It's negligence, lenticular cloud. This is despicable, says Mark. We all send you love, Andrew. I'm very sorry to hear what you're going through. At one stage, I did invite Andrew on, but he's poor man. It's so emotional. I didn't want to make him endure that. So I said I would go through his story on my own. So much love sent to the family in abundance. It's just awful. Lots of love to you all. And I hope that you get some resolution soon. I truly do. I'm so sorry to hear all of that. So sorry indeed. Just briefly, Richard Branson, I looked at in detail on Friday's show. Just the girl said in the comments, I was working in an airport, served him coffee at a cafe. He came in and complained to me. I said, you get better quality coffee in first class lounge. You will get normal coffee here, which isn't to your taste. He told her manager, she got the sack. She said, very cruel, as I needed that job. Indeed it is. And thank you for all your kind words and suggestions. And good morning to Shannon Pekalski. Sounds like a fantastic Polish name there. I grew up with Anna Pawlowski, who had come over from Poland. So good morning to you, Shannon. Good morning from USA. Says, thank you for your honest, in-depth reporting. Love you, and love you too, Shannon. Thank you all for being here. Thank you as ever to my wonderful donators. Thank you to SPR Smoke. Thank you to Iris O'Callaghan. Thank you to Lindy Barker. Thank you to everybody who supports Wake Up. And before we go today, I just want to talk briefly about the importance of structure. It's a Virgo full moon this week, and you know I love that stuff. Right, Virgo full moon this week. Virgo is an earth sign. Now, structure obviously means different things to different people depending on your background and formative learning. Some people feel hemmed in at the very idea of structure, but it's my experience that you won't get a damn thing of worth done without some serious structure in place. Structure is also linked to stability in that the pressure of structure creates a stability. And honestly, it is my experience that you can pretty much forget motivation, because the two things that will get your ideas off the ground are discipline and structure. Those are the necessary keys to complete whatever you intend to. And this week, you have the wind in your sails if you intend to launch something. Absolutely, you do. Full moons are brilliant for things coming to completion and also for conceiving new ideas. And there are so many wonderful benefits attached to structure. I'm going to briefly work through them. There are obviously mental and emotional health benefits, because when you have structure in place, it enables you to stop feeling overwhelmed. It will reduce your anxiety. It creates a sense of safety by providing familiarity, which is wonderful. It will also reduce what is known as decision fatigue, because when you have fewer daily choices to make, you will feel less overwhelmed. That is the reality. And structure also promotes better sleep. It's kind of like just a regular lifestyle. I think we've been told for the longest time that structure and stability are just so boring. They're not. I think actually they're the sexiest things that we could do to get your plans in action. And Mercury is in retrograde. It's a blood moon tomorrow. And Shinri said the last full moon of the year, the real new year in 18 days. I hear you. Spring is springing. So also with structure, what it will also give you is that sense that you are in control. You are in the driving seat, and that will have a knock-on effect on your confidence. So please, if you are thinking of launching something, make it this week. Do it. Yes, how are you all? Hope you're all well. Thank you for being here today. And of course, as ever, we are going to, first of all, thank you to all of the wonderful people who make Wake Up possible. And I'm going to end on a quote, because that's kind of what I do around here, right, kids? And that is, structure not only increases our chance of success, it makes us more efficient at it. And on that note, I will see you on Friday, and have a fantastic week. Lots of love to you all. Drumstick says, thanks for a diverse show today, Sonia. You're very welcome. Thank you all, you beautiful people. See you Friday, peeps. Lots of love to you. Thank you, Mary.